Okay, let's do some of the book. Let's finish up the book of Exodus. And what I'd like to do is kind of introduce this one law in Exodus. And this is called a case law. Okay, what is a case law? Do you realize there's law like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. Those are general principle laws. There's a whole nother type of law that's called case law. And a case law goes like this. If Johnny drinks, and if Johnny drinks and Johnny drives, Johnny will get put in jail. Okay? It's an if-then type of law that gives you specific cases. That's why they call it case law. Okay? If the person does this, then this will happen. And they call that case law then, if-then, with specific cases that are happening. So what we have in chapter 21 here is a specific case law. Okay? And let me just read the passage from Exodus chapter 21, verse 22. It says, if men who are fighting, so you've got two guys fighting. Okay, two guys fighting. If men who are fighting hit a pregnant woman, okay, so you've got two guys fighting, and what happens probably? The woman tries to break it up or whatever. She gets into the fight. So you got two guys fighting, and then if the woman who's pregnant gets hit and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined. The guy who hits the pregnant woman must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and bruise for bruise. We would call that the what? The lex talionis. Do you remember the eye for eye, tooth for tooth? This is actually listed here. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, burn for burn. And this is called the lex talionis, okay? The law of retaliation. The law of retaliation in this case law. Now, what is actually going on here? You've got two guys fighting. This woman jumps in. She tries to break up the fight. The guy punches her. Now, it says there's two situations that come out of that. One is if there's no injury to whom? She's fine. The guy is fined that hit her. He has to pay a fine. There's no injury to the woman, but the woman apparently miscarries or has a child, and the child, it's assumed here that the child dies, okay? So then the guy who hit her has to pay a fine. So that what happens is you have here a situation where basically this premature birth thing with the baby suffering an injury, most likely death, because they, premature back then, they don't do the preemies like we do in hospitals today that save the life of the mother and the baby. Back then, the baby dies and stuff. But notice what the penalty is. The penalty is that the fee be paid. And so then this raises the question about the fetus. Is the fetus a person before the fetus is born? And the fetus is now, there's been a miscarriage and stuff as a result of getting hit and things. And so notice a fee is charged here that's arranged by the husband. So apparently it's negotiable. This fee is negotiable, and it may depend on, what month she was, if it were early or whether it was later and things like that. Does this passage have, let me do one more thing here. But if the woman is hit, and we said, and there's damage done to her, basically, well, let's just go back. So the woman is hit, then it's eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Eye for an eye, tooth for tooth for the woman if she's damaged. Now, why would there be less for the fetus that dies? Why would there be less of a penalty? By the way, in that culture too, if a slave gets hurt, was there a fee paid for a slave being hurt rather than eye for an eye, tooth for tooth? So is there certain hierarchy in terms of how the law is applied? Okay? Now, does this passage have anything to tell us about the abortion issue? And people have used this passage on abortion. Is abortion really the question here? Is this passage addressing the abortion issue? No, it's not. Two guys are fighting. A woman gets in the middle, and bam, they hit her, and she has a child. Now, let me just work another aspect of this. Does intent matter in terms of punishment? Okay, I'm driving down Grapevine Road. There's a kid riding his bicycle. I'm driving down Grapevine Road like I do every day. The kid, all of a sudden, out of clear blue, just turns this thing and swerves right in front of me, and I hit the kid, I kill the kid, the kid's under my car, I just killed the kid. Question, do I go to jail for the rest of my life for murdering that kid? Do I probably regret that for the rest of my life? Yes. But do I go to jail for that? Now, by the way, in that situation, did I kill the kid? I killed the kid. Question, do I go to jail for murder? Why don't I go to jail for murder? Okay. Because what?
You go to jail for manslaughter.
You go to jail for manslaughter? You go to jail? Would I go to jail here? If the kid swerved right in front of me like that? Are you kidding me? Holy cow. All right. You guys, all right. Oh, I'm paranoid now. But by the way, it wasn't part of my defense would be, was it my fault? Was there anything I could do? My brakes are good in my car. You understand? I probably couldn't even hit my brakes. The kid just wham, bam, and it's over. Okay. Question, was there any malice and aforethought? Was there any malice and aforethought? Do malice and aforethought count? Yes, okay. Yes. Now, is it possible, suppose my brakes were bad and my brakes couldn't stop the car? Would you call that what? A negligence? There could be negligence and things like that. But in that case, there was no malice or forethought and things. Now, let's go back to the woman getting hit. The guy's getting the woman off his back. This woman's trying to pull this guy off from hitting her husband or something, and he goes wham, and he gives her an elbow or something like that. Question, is the guy trying to hurt the woman, to get the woman off his back? Yeah, so for her it goes eye to eye. Question, he hits the baby and the baby miscarriages. Was there any intent against the baby? There's no intent against the child. So in other words, yes, the woman, he was trying to hit her, but he wasn't necessarily trying to hit the baby. And so I think there's a distinction there between those two. And so a fine is given for the child, for the infant stuff. Does this have anything to do with abortion? No, it doesn't. And so you have to be really careful about pulling verses out like this and using them for purposes for which they were not given. This is not given to give us, the Bible's explanation of abortion. This, by the way, does this have to do with a fetus? Yes, it does, but it's not given for that purpose, and I think you got to be really careful about pulling verses out like this and using them for purposes for which they're not designed. Okay, that's my point for this. Be careful about pulling things out of context in the Scripture and using them for a different context that which they were not designed. So, okay, so that's this is called a case law. If two men are fighting and if the guy slugs the woman, then this is what it's called. So this is case law. If this happens, then this happens, then this would be the punishment for that. So this is, okay. So basically the implications for the fetus is human. This does not really address that issue. That's not the point of this. Although, is the fetus valued? Is the fetus valued? Yes, but it doesn't answer the whole question about, the questions that come up from that. So, and by the way, I'm very, very strongly pro-life and things like that. But what I'm saying is you got to be careful. Develop good arguments. Don't use verses like this that aren't good to use. So